agree.
Um,
Should we decide on
yeah, you want to do the
the
first reading or second reading?
hmm, which one will make me angrier? Let's go in that direction.
Oh, wait, what? What's
I
gonna make
said
you
which
more
I said
angry?
yeah.
We could do the gospel.
Okay,
You want to read it?
sure.
Okay.
Jesus entered the synagogue. There was a man there who had a withered hand. They watched Jesus closely to see if he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Come up here before us." Then he said to Pharisees, "Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save life rather than to destroy it?" But they remained silent. Looking around at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart, Jesus said to them, "Stretch out your hand." Said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately took counsel with the Herodians against him to put him to death. Dramatic.
It is dramatic. Um,
Talk about Mean Girls.
right. So one time I heard this priest say that they're always trying to catch Jesus like Wile E. Coyote in the Roadrunner.
That's
And,
really accurate.
and this is a Roadrunner situation, right? So Jesus goes into the synagogue, and if a man has a withered hand, it was a sign of a generational curse, likely. So they've got their binoculars, and they're watching Jesus to see if he will heal him. And I think it's beautiful when Jesus heals on the Sabbath, but that's how ritualistic they'd become,
Hmm.
and how like nearsighted they'd become. That someone restoring his ability to work, or his standing in the community, um, that, that should happen on the Sabbath. But they
It's
were,
like they were like blinded by tradition, it feels like.
yeah, yeah. He was mad. That Jesus performed a miracle. Um, so Jesus also, they were mad. Um, so he said, "Listen, I'm doing good on the Sabbath. I'm saving a life instead of destroying it." Looking at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart, Jesus said, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees were so upset that they wanted to kill Jesus. So Jesus went into a synagogue on the Sabbath, cured a man with a withered hand. They got mad. Jesus smoked him, because they had no answer. He literally stunned them into silence with his answer. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save life rather than to destroy it? Um, yeah, the Pharisees were just they were mean girls. And they went in working with the local government to go to how to put Jesus to death. Um, so it's very contentious. And I take heart that Jesus was at odds with the religious leaders of his day. Um, whenever I have issues with bishops or priests, and honestly, I think it does echo back to Bishop Buddy, like what she did with Trump, where she said, "Hey, like remember the queer youth in this country, and remember the immigrants." And it was actually really laughable because I think they were hearing the other side of the gospel from this female bishop. Um, I thought it was actually really amazing, and it seemed that Trump was he was mad. He wants her to apologize to him and to the country and to her church. Said it was he did the whole thing when he gets mad at somebody. He goes on social media and Twitter's. But anyways, without getting too political, um, I think that Jesus also called out the powerful, and Um, yeah, and sometimes we can upset people by doing good, especially if we're challenging the status quo. And I wonder if the Pharisees were jealous of Jesus as of his abilities to perform miracles, and his way with the crowds. I wonder if that was jealousy. Um, but in the Roman Empire, anyone who was charismatic and who could whip up a crowd was a threat to Rome that needed to be
Mm.
put down, because they were constantly dealing with these insurrections, um, and they dealt with them with crucifixion. If you if you if you tried to overthrow the government, you were gonna get crucified. So that's what I think it means biblically, just on like a historical biblical level. How about you? What do you think?
I think for me, I think that I do think that the Pharisees and everyone that was upset by what Jesus did on the Sabbath was, like I said before, I think they were just blinded by tradition. I think that they were so stuck in their ways and stuck in the constants of what life had been for 1,000 years at that point. How long? How long had
How long
in
had
history?
Jewish
Like how?
tradition been around? Yeah,
Yeah,
probably about
yeah.
probably say about 1,000 years. Yeah. Hmm.
I couldn't remember if it was 1,000 or like 2,000 years, but for a very, very, very long time, for like an amount of time that like we would even struggle to conceive of.
Hmm.
Like the distance between us and
I
Jesus.
think
It's like that.
I think earliest Judaism is like 1500 BCE. Very
Okay,
very early. Yeah.
so that's like 3,000 years then
Hmm. Like the Book of
from
Isaiah
today.
is like
From today, yeah.
700 BCE.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like I think, I just think it's such a silly, pathetic thing to be upset about too. Like to be like, well, like you worked on the Sabbath, so you have to die now. Like he gave someone their livelihood back, and they were so just offended by that. Like imagine just being angered by someone doing a good deed.
Right.
Like no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah. So just like Catholics and Protestants will get into arguments these days online. Um, Judaism, rival groups within Judaism, they would throw shade. And it would be very tense between the two. Um, but I think that over time, it's created. I could see how anti-Semitism developed out of the
Hmm.
text because it talks about like the Pharisees who are going to kill Jesus, like these,
Yeah.
and it gets darker to the point where, like in the Gospel of John, it's talking about the Jews, and sometimes it has some pretty strong language
Yeah.
for Jewish people. Um, so I think that was helpful for me to know that rival Jewish groups often would speak to each other like with a lot of contention. So,
So what
um,
you're saying is humanity doesn't change.
right, yeah,
Hmm.
humanity is always very tribal. Um, what about well, we could read it one more time. I can read it, and we can
Okay.
read it for how how we hear God speaking to us. Jesus entered the synagogue. There was a man there who had a withered hand, and they watched Jesus closely to see if he would cure on the Sabbath, so they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Come up here before us." Then he said to the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save a life rather than destroy it?" But they remained silent. Looking around at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart, Jesus said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately took counsel with the Herodians against him to put him to death.
I think what jumps out to me this time is The fact that the Pharisees literally only went there to catch him. Like, how petty and how spiteful. It wasn't like they were in the area and then they witnessed Jesus breaking the Sabbath. They're like, we are going to catch him. We are sick of his bullshit. We're not putting up with it. He's gonna fuck up and we're gonna report him immediately. Like, that's just, it's like so small minded and so like in, immature and childish to like go out of your way to catch someone doing wrong so you can get them in trouble and literally destroy them. Like, what do they gain from that?
I'm sure they felt very self-righteous and very like, I'm
Yeah,
doing this in the name of religion
sanctimonious.
and God. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. They're like, oh, this is for the community's own good, for your own good.
they were full of righteous power.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, humanity doesn't change.
I think I kind of identified with the person that Jesus healed.
Hmm.
Like, I wonder how he felt about this whole exchange.
That's true. I didn't even think about that perspective. So, like,
Yeah,
he basically had, there was no way for him to exist in society as it was back then, to have support himself for his own living. And meanwhile, there's like this group of people that is like vehemently upset that someone could drastically improve your life. Like what that would feel like to have just these group of people watching angrily and waiting for your life to improve, but they see that as a negative. They see that as something horrible and a blight on society. Like that's such a that must have been such a strange experience.
yeah. I think I'm hearing from the readings that God will heal us
Hmm.
even when it's upsetting for other people around us. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that
I like
Jesus
that.
loves
I like
us.
how you phrase that.
Yeah, and he wants to heal us and restore us to community. Because I'm sure his withered hand, that he was viewed as unclean, um, for sure. And people who are unclean had to be outside of the camp. So here's Jesus trying to restore a man to community on the Sabbath, on this day of rest. And I think God also heals us when we rest, when we take
Hmm.
Sabbaths. Um, yeah, Jesus was willing to risk his life to heal this guy. And I love how brave he was. He was such a Gryffindor sometimes. Jesus, he stood up to the Pharisees. Um,
Well, and also too, I think I love seeing like this moment here, particularly where it's saying looking around at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart. I feel like this is one of those moments where we get to see a glimpse into the human nature of Jesus. Like feeling an emotion like anger feels very human to me, and I think that it's really kind of it's like a nice reminder that like yes, he is all powerful. He's part of the Trinity. He is everything. But at the end of the day, he was also still human. And I think feeling that level of emotion and not just feeling that level of emotion, but being motivated by it, I think feels very human. And it's beautiful to kind of see those moments.
hmm, he was a divine person with a human nature.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Jesus was able to get angry without sinning, which is very impressive.
Wish I could do that.
Yeah, I tend to get angry and sin, but Jesus was able to get angry without sin. Um, but I think he really was able to. It was a sign of his intelligence and his holiness and his charisma that he was able to just pull out these like few lines out of pocket, and he was
Hmm.
able to silence people. Um,
Well, and also he was like an agent of change too, I feel like. And I think that sorry I cut you off.
no, it's true. He's an agent of change.
And I think that for me, I really find it hard to analyze the content of his character as not being someone who would be progressive, as not being someone who would, if existed today, would be like towards the left of the political spectrum. Like he literally is looking like societal expectations, norms, and desires, and pretty much saying "fuck you." I'm gonna do what's right and what's moral, and that's why I always think it's funny when people try to come from like a biblical perspective from a direction where like we shouldn't be taking care of the sick, we should be taking care of the needy, we shouldn't be working to make our communities better. Like we should all be thinking of ourselves only. We should all, you know, build a higher wall instead of a longer table. I always think it's moments like this where it's like, how do you come to that conclusion and still call yourself a Christian?
There's a YouTube video called Republican Jesus, which is pretty funny to watch.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think Jesus was socially progressive. I do. I think he was progressive in there. But some people
And
say that
and fiscally progressive too. He wasn't like, oh, I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative. He
he
wasn't at
wasn't a
all.
libertarian.
Yeah.
Hilarious. Um, Jesus, some people say that it's, it's like looking into the bottom of a well where there's a little bit of water and some sunlight. And all you're going to see looking back at you is your own reflection. The people project
Mm.
onto Jesus their own values and beliefs and
Mm.
superstitions. I
Are you saying that's
disagree.
why I see him as a leftist?
I disagree with that revisionist theology of Jesus, but I've always found it very fascinating that Jesus
It
always
is.
seems to agree with me. How strange! But I think
It,
we're supposed to read it very close enough where we can be pierced to the heart by his words as needed, or where we aren't like, oh yeah, like I'm in total alignment with my social values.
like
Um,
Jesus isn't a biscuit; he's a mirror.
some people say, yeah, that it's just like lifting up a mirror, trying to figure out who the person of Jesus was. People talk about the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith, and they say that they're two separate people. But
That's crazy.
if you believe that the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith are two separate people, you aren't Christian. You
No,
aren't mainline Protestant
you're
or
nothing.
Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox. Yeah, you got to believe that the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith are the same person. But yeah, so I'm hearing God talk about restoring people to community. I'm seeing Jesus' boldness in the face of opposition by religious leaders, his bravery, and he's even willing to risk his own life to heal us, which is not the first time.
Mhm.
Yeah. You want to read it again for a call to
Yeah,
action?
absolutely.
Okay.
Jesus has entered the synagogue. There was a man there who had a withered hand. They watched Jesus closely to see if he would cure him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, come up here before us. Then he said to the Pharisees, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save life rather than to destroy it? But they remained silent. Looking around at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart, Jesus said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately took counsel with the Herodians against him to put him to death.
Hmm. My call to action is to be more disciplined, and
Mm.
in the coming, like in the coming months, about like having my services ready and publishing the videos and trying being really intentional, because it seems like Jesus was on stage sometimes, or the spotlight was on him, and um, I'm finding that um, I like to. I'm not sure I really love the spotlight, but I'm gonna have
Mm.
to get into the spotlight a little bit to promote the underground church to get it to grow. Um, so, and I think that I just don't know who that Jesus might heal, or how I can be healed, how my withered hand can be restored, a
Mm.
proverbial withered hand, or how God can work through me, to help other people, and
Yeah.
also to just ignore the haters,
Hmm.
because even Jesus had haters.
Hmm. I like that.
Yeah. How about you? What's your call to action?
Well, lucky for you, I absolutely adore being in the spotlight. So I will be able to pick up any amount of shine you don't want to take upon yourself. I will bear, I will bear that burden. Um, I think I would say that my call to action is to be better and to heal more in spite of everyone around me. To be my best version, to be my most healed self, regardless of how upsetting others may find it. And I do mean that though, because I think that it's very easy for me, to get hung up on how other people view me, how they perceive me, and what they think of me. And
Mm,
I think growing up from a very early age, I was really trained to focus on how others perceive me and what society thinks of me and what that means for me and for my family. And I think growing up and now really kind of coming into my own as a very, very late bloomer, I think that I will follow God's path, and I think that's going to mean me being my best self in spite of anyone around me who has any other opinion.
yeah. So you'd identify with the person being healed and the people who are upset that it's even
Hmm.
happening in the first
Hmm.
place.
I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. It's just it's so shocking how they sought to destroy Jesus, you know. Um, but
They were threatened.
they were, yeah, good. And I think that we're supposed to be, um,
Threatening.
in a way, yeah, we're supposed to disrupt the status quo
Yeah.
when we aren't supposed to go along
Hmm.
with evil things.
Do you know what this makes me think of? I think that there's, I'm gonna butcher it because I don't know the exact wording, but there's like the very famous quote where just because something is lawful does not make it moral, does not make it correct, does not make it just. I feel like this reading is like very exemplary of that fact. Like the lawful according to the society thing, the just according to society thing would be to ignore the man with the withered hand and to not heal him.
Hmm.
And I think bucking against that, I think, is very emblematic of the fact that something can be lawful on the books, but not just in the right, not
Hmm.
just and right in the eyes of God.
Yeah, it's a question of what is first. Is love first
Hmm.
or is truth first? And
Hmm.
um, I think that Peter Kreeft, he's a Catholic philosopher. He talked about how sometimes progressives will prioritize love over truth, and conservatives will prioritize truth over love.
Hmm.
And you need both love and truth, right?
Balance.
But I think love is more important than truth. Um,
I think love
because
is more powerful,
God
personally.
is love. Yeah,
Hmm. Exactly.
there's truth in love, but
Exactly.
I think that love is is slightly more powerful and
Hmm.
um should be prioritized before.
And cherished.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's slightly higher as a transcendental. The Bible would agree. I mean, Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life, but God is, and the Bible said that God is love. So I guess you could say either
Yeah.
God is truth and God is love. Um,
And life is love too.
it is. Yeah, it all comes down to love. One of my undergrad professors, Dr. Regis Martin, said that we could have developed an entire Christian theology on just the prologue of John's Gospel, which is about the light and the dark, um, and just these truths about Jesus. And yeah, but anyways, any closing thoughts about the readings?
Hmm. Spite is love.
Maybe yeah. Let's just read it one last time, because now that we've like the whole point of us doing this exercise of what does it mean biblically, what how do we hear God speaking to us, and what is our call to action? Like it's supposed to mean something different from when we began to now when we're ending. So I'll
Hmm.
read it one more time.
You're switching it up, or you're gonna do a fourth reading of it
Yeah,
tomorrow?
switching my wig. Okay. Jesus entered the synagogue. There was a man there who had a withered hand. They watched Jesus closely to see if he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Come up here before us." Then he said to the Pharisees, "It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save a life rather than to destroy it." But they remained silent, looking around at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart. Jesus said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went, immediately took counsel with the Herodians against him to put him to death. Mark 3 1 through 6. Cool. Well, should we do the consecration, and then I think we should probably be done.
We're yeah, right.
Hmm? What'd you say?
Are you there, sir?
Yeah, we're cutting in and out. I'm just gonna end the
We're
recording.
gonna